at a hotel, and as I was going away, she sort of said, Daddy, did you know that President Reagan is the only president who fought in the Civil War? And since so many people had made an issue of age, I decided to tell the president that, which produced extraordinary laughter, and then a few jokes from him, some of which I can repeat and some of which I can't. See me later. But he said an interesting thing. I told him that I was a producer for PBS, that I was working on a film about the history of the Civil War, and he suddenly got a really long 1,000-mile stare, and he said, you know, I can remember when the GAR veterans, the Grand Army of the Republic veterans, would march on the 4th of July down Main Street in Dixon, Illinois, when he was growing up. And he said, who's funding this? And I said, well, Mr. President, we're not completely funded, but we're enjoying the support of public television and the National Endowment for the Humanities. And now we've also got support from an American corporation, at that point General Motors, and we were looking for private foundations. He goes, that's exactly it, exactly it. And as you referenced, this public-private partnership, Bob, I couldn't help but think of that conversation that I had with him. He put his arms on my shoulders the way an aunt does or an uncle does to sort of tell me, to remind me the importance of that kind of partnership. That it was, he said, the government was there to prime the pump, and then it was the responsibility of the community, because only government could be that lid that could keep the diverse groups together. And that without that governing thing, things tend to go off. We tend to treat ourselves as independent free agents, and we forget the shared sacrifice and the commonwealth, which always gets us through the toughest of times. And we can think about those toughest times from our past. That's where the great value of history lies, in our ability to look at it, not because we're going to know how it turned out, but because we're going to find lessons of leadership and lessons of citizenship that we need to be reminded of constantly. And when you think about the shared sacrifice that got us through the Second World War, the shared sacrifice that survived the Depression, and we can also think about the sacrifice that took place out here in the western counties of this extraordinary, hugely central state in a period known as the Dust Bowl. So I am honored and delighted, ladies and gentlemen, to have this opportunity to speak with you tonight, to share the common messages our past continually directs our way. Let us listen to. Often as a culture we have ignored this joyful historical noise, becoming in the process blissfully ignorant of the power those past lives and stories and moments have over this moment, and indeed our vast and unknown future. I am interested in that power of history, and I am interested in its many varied voices, not the voices of the old top-down version of our past, which would try to convince us that American history is only the story of great men, capital G, capital M, and certainly not those recent voices that have entered our studies, voices that seem to suggest that American history is only a catalog of white European crimes. I'm interested in listening to the voices of a true, honest, complicated past that's unafraid of controversy and tragedy, but equally drawn to those stories and moments that suggest an abiding faith in the human spirit, and particularly the unique role this remarkable republic seems to play in the positive progress of mankind. That quite simply has been my creed, my mantra, the lens through which I have tried to tell our histories over the last 35 years exclusively for public television. We begin to see and have to admit that we've made the same films over and over again. Each film asks a deceptively simple question. Who are we? Who are we? Who are those strange and complicated people who like to call themselves Americans? What does an investigation of the past tell us about not only where we've been, but where we are, and most importantly, where we might be going? And while you can never answer that question, who are we hope that with each successive project, we're able to deepen the question. You know, American history is a loud, raucous, exquisite collection of noises that often combine to make the sweetest kind of music I know, and we've tried to listen to this music as much as we can in putting together the films we have made, the stories we have tried to tell. It is a kind of emotional archaeology that we are attempting, listening to the ghosts and echoes of an almost inexpressibly wise past that paradoxically points us confidently towards those future horizons that will comprise our fate as individuals, as a community, as a state, as a country. And so I'm thrilled to be here with you to share with you bits and pieces of our latest effort. This is a historical account of an often overlooked or usually abbreviated moment in American history. The worst man-made ecological disaster superimposed over the greatest economic cataclysm in the history of mankind. It is a morality tale, a parable, though based utterly on fact about our relationship to the land that sustains us, a lesson I think we all believe we ignore at our peril. It is Mother Nature and human nature in sometimes disastrous collision. It takes place on the southern plains, much of it centered in the Oklahoma Panhandle, Beaver, Texas, and Cimarron counties, the place once known as no man's land, a place someone said in the early 19th century that was wholly impossible for human habitation. Boise City, the county seat of Cimarron County, became the epicenter of the Dust Bowl, and our film pretty much considers it ground zeros for the stories we tell. On the one hand, more than any other film we've made, this is an intimate oral history based on the vivid testimony of more than 24 people who lived through it. That will probably be, I'm sorry to say, the last recorded testimony of that generation that lived through this horrible cataclysm, the Dust Bowl. They have, we believe, an incredible, moving story to tell. The reason we even have these stories necessitates that I thank a few people that made it possible. Obviously, all the folks at OETA, particularly John McCarroll, Ashley Bark, and Bill Perry, the incomparable Bill Perry. Where is he? Somewhere. He's probably working.
Bill Thresh.
And Bill Thresh, too. And Bob Blackburn from the History Center, Dan Provo, Paul Lambert, all from the Historical Society, Kirk and Dana Humphreys, who kindly let us conduct some of the interviews in their home. And it's also important for me to tell you that when I use the word we, it's not royal. These films are hugely collaborative efforts, and this film would not have been made without the tireless work of one person who's not here, our co-producer and writer, the kind of author of our enterprise, Dayton Duncan, who's out in Guyman, because we'll be in Guyman tomorrow, God, storms, and other things willing, to share with the survivors of the Dust Bowl, the people that we filmed, now diminished by 4 individuals by their untimely passing, the clips from the film that they appear in. But here our producer, Julie Dunphy, and our chief researcher and associate producer, Susan Shoemaker, who went out after I made some appeals, easy for me to do, on public television stations all over the Dust Bowl area in the 5 states. They went out and sifted through the hundreds and hundreds of responses we get to find the people we interviewed, to find the rare archives, some of which have never been seen outside of family albums, to find the footage, to find the locations necessary to tell our story. And I'm also very pleased to say that we have with us here one of our editors, Craig Mellish, who also doubles as a field producer, still photographer, and with me, a diehard and still long-suffering Red Sox fan. So, they are equally the authors of this, and I look forward to, after we view the clips, to a conversation in which I'll ask Julie and Susan to join me on stage, and we'll try to answer as best we can the questions. Supplementing the testimony of our survivors are the commentaries of 4 historians. It's pretty great that 3 of them have roots in the Dust Bowl, and the 4th is Tim Egan, who wrote the book The Worst Hard Time, who actually moved into the Dust Bowl and learned firsthand from the family something about it. So we feel that these are not flyover people who tend to look down at Oklahoma from 35,000 feet, but people who've sort of been nurtured by its extraordinary welcome and amazing and gracious landscape. For visual materials, we use seldom seen motion pictures, not just from the private collections, but from archives around the country, as well as an array, I hope you'll believe, of compelling still photographs, some from the famous photographers who worked for the Farm Security Administration, the FSA, during the Depression, like Arthur Rothstein and Dorothea Lange, but also, as I mentioned, from the Historical Society